If you're struggling to get crisp, stunning footage from your Insta360 X4, you're not alone. If your video quality isn't living up to your expectations, it's probably not the camera. It will be the settings, the camera placement, and how you edit. So let's take a look on how to fix it. If you haven't got your camera set up right in the first place, then it'll be an uphill battle to get the best images possible. Make sure your camera is set to H.265 and high bitrate recording, and that the sharpness setting is set to medium. I found that high sharpness settings give you an over-sharp digital looking image with hard edges, and that the low setting can be a bit soft. Medium sharpness setting is a good compromise for the best images straight out of the camera. The resolution that you're recording with the X4 presents the biggest confusion for beginners in particular. When you shoot 360 video, whichever resolution you select refers to the entire 360 image. So if you select 8K video, this is never 8K in one direction. It's only a slice of that 8K resolution, so realistically it's around 2.7K. If you shoot in 5.7K, then when you edit your video, it will only be around HD quality, so 1920 by 1080 in one direction. So always choose the highest possible resolution to start with, so that when you edit and reframe your footage, you get the highest quality images possible. It's made even more confusing because when you edit in the app or the studio, you're able to export in 4K, but this is upscaled, so the software fills in the gaps to create a larger resolution image. And we will look at the best export settings later in the video. A quick bonus tip here before you press record is to keep your lenses clean and remove the lens guards. And buy several microfiber cloths, and I usually have one in my front pocket, in my back pocket, and one in my camera bag. Any smears, smudges or dust on the lens will affect your image quality. When you start shooting with your X4, it makes sense at first, especially if you're a beginner, to use auto settings. And auto settings most of the time, in most situations, does a pretty good job. However, if you're trying to get the best images possible, then you have to consider this very important fact about auto. The camera is basically guessing what the shot should look like based on averages. So this could easily make the shot too bright or too dark or the wrong color. Most importantly, the camera doesn't know what you want to achieve from this shot, so it doesn't know exactly how you want it to look. If we look at this walk through the cathedral, the camera thinks the most important part of the image is the inside architecture, and as a result it overexposes the windows, making them too bright with no detail showing outside. If I select manual settings, I can now get a good compromise in exposure with more accurate colours and contrast inside, as well as being able to see more detail through the window. So the ultimate way of getting the best exposure is by selecting full manual here in the settings. This will allow you to reduce the ISO to between 100 and 400 ideally, which will give you less grain and less noise. You can then adjust your shutter speed to give you an exposure that looks balanced, where the sky or the windows aren't too bright and washed out. The use of manual exposure really comes into its own when you're shooting at night or in low light situations. In these scenarios in low light, using auto, the camera will immediately think that it's too dark, so that it will push the ISO up, which will make the image brighter but will also introduce a lot of noise and a lot of grain into your image. And this will have a major effect on the image quality, lowering it significantly. So set the ISO settings ideally between 100 and 200, but certainly no more than 800 maximum. The shutter speed can also be set too high when you use auto settings, and it can result in motion blur and ghosting. Depending on the lighting conditions, try and set the shutter speed between 100th and 200th of a second to significantly reduce motion blur and ghosting. Also shoot in 5.7K resolution because this has higher light sensitivity, making it better suited to lower light conditions. And did you know that you can also enable low light stabilization? And you can do that by selecting this icon here. And this will reduce motion blur in low light conditions and improve image stabilization. A magic bullet here if you don't want to go full manual with your exposure settings, and that is to use exposure value. So to access exposure value, swipe from the right of your screen here, and then this will allow you to make the auto exposure darker or lighter by adjusting the numbers here to either negative for darker images or positive for a brighter image. And you only have to set this once and it will be applied to everything that you shoot from that point on. So remember to reset it once you finish shooting or if you move to another location. So I usually set the EV to minus 0.3 or minus 0.7, or sometimes even minus 1. And this will then tell the auto exposure to make everything slightly darker. And this will usually then add more detail into the sky without compromising the rest of the image. Of course, the magic of these cameras compared to a single lens camera is that they capture everything that goes on around you. So the simplest way to capture the best images is with uncomplicated moves and simple camera placement. And if you're moving the camera around a lot, then this is just more processing for the camera to deal with. And you're going to have greater chance of stitching errors. There's going to be a greater possibility of changes in exposure, changes in color, lighting changes, and just more for the camera to deal with and process. In short, sometimes to capture the best images, you can simply put the camera on a selfie stick and hold it out in front of you and keep it simple. This is a double-edged sword, and the problem with this simplicity is that you might think that you can put the camera wherever you want and put no thought into what you're filming, and you'll just sort it in the edit when you reframe it. You do still need to be very mindful of the stitch line, for example, because if you hold the camera out like this in front of you with the stitch line facing you, then you're going to have a problem with the image and it will look something like this. So even though you are using a 360 camera and you can reframe your image, when you shoot with your camera, treat it like you've got two single lens cameras. So you've got one single lens camera here and one single lens camera here, and whatever you're shooting, point one lens towards the main subject. And this way you'll reduce stitching errors. The other thing with camera placement is to ensure that you're close enough to the subject you're filming. These lenses will capture everything, but if you're too far away from your subject, then whatever you're filming could look tiny in your shot. And of course, if you're tiny in your shot, you could zoom into your image, but this brings with it another problem which we'll look at next in the editing process. So if we take this super wide shot and zoom in, we can now see the action closer up. But that crisp image is now turned to mush because the more we zoom in, the less information we have to create our video image. So get the camera positioning correct to start with, and then select default or mega view in the edit, and as much as possible avoid zooming into your image. The default and mega view will help prevent curved horizons and distorted vertical and horizontal lines. And in the studio, you can also tweak these parameters to ensure that the horizon is straight, which will give your video a more natural and professional look. You can also color grade your shots now using the studio software. And this will allow you to add a little bit more saturation to make your colors pop, or add more contrast and darken the shadows. And this manual adjustment does allow you to fix some of the mistakes that the auto settings may have made during shooting. When you export your footage, ensure that you're exporting 3840 by 2160, and for the best uncompressed quality, export using the ProRes codec. The ProRes codec, however, is very slow to export and does create huge files. So a good compromise here is to use the H.265 codec and a bitrate of 125. Remember to download your free 60-page X4 quick start guide down below, and if you want more shooting tips to help you get the most out of your X4, then you want to watch this video next, and I'll see you over there.